Hello, hello. Hi, Barry. Nice to have you with me today.
Hi there, Elena. Thanks very much for having me.
Listen, so I always enjoy these conversations, and particularly with individuals like yourself, because I feel that you are so multidimensional, and and I'm really curious to hear about your career journey and your entrepreneurship and also your ventures. And I feel like there's so much to unpack here. So I want you to just give me a snapshot of who is Barry, a quick overview of kind of how, because you started off in a very different field than where you are today, it seems, from what I know. So I'm curious just to tell me a little bit about how you came about doing what you're doing today.
Sure, yeah. So it's an interesting story. I come from a mixed background, and we did a lot of travel when I was younger because my dad was in the services, and that led me to think, oh, I want to do something in that part of the working world, as it were. So I went to university, studied international tourism management, came out of that realizing, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Ended up going and finding a job when I got out of that, which was I sort of pitched myself to the companies out there as a blank slate. I'd managed to get through 4 years of university, didn't really have any experience of anything, and ended up in a sales job for a software company. And very lucky because that software company got acquired by Microsoft. So I ended up working for Microsoft for a few years, from a business development and account management side of things around payroll software, training software, software to help streamline some of the processes within businesses that were admin heavy, and that if we could help them become a bit more strategic about that, that would also warrant the price tag for our software from Microsoft's perspective. And then I ended up coming to the Middle East in 2005, actually, because it was one of those days in London where I was working at the time. I got off the tube. It was raining, it was grey, it was miserable. And I looked up and I said, what am I doing exactly? And I thought, well, my family had been in the Middle East for quite some time. I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and see what's happening there. And actually, I was on my way to China, funnily enough, because I left Microsoft. I did my teaching English as a foreign language qualification. And then I said, right, I'm going to go to China. I'm going to teach English. And whilst I'm there, I'm going to learn Mandarin. And then I'm going to come back to the UK and be middleman for East and West when it comes to business. And so that was the plan. And I thought I'll just stop in Dubai to see my family and say hi. And then 16 years later, I'm still here in terms of this thing. I never got to China. And whilst I landed here, I started to look around, and this was 2005. So Dubai was booming. It was pre-2008, 2009 when things were going wrong. And it was a good time to be here. And so I started to see what was going on. I got employed by a recruitment company when I got here, because I actually left Microsoft in the UK to get away from the IT industry. I then found myself interviewing for IT related roles in Dubai, and I thought, hang on, this doesn't make sense again, and ended up working for the recruitment company. Fast forward a few years, ended up back into the IT space with Microsoft partners, in terms of gold certified partners that were working with Microsoft. And then 2008, 2009 hit. I was working for a company. We were hit quite badly. I was managing a sales team at that time of 10 people. And we went through the ringer in terms of none of us were being paid. And, it was 4 months that we weren't getting paid. And eventually had to say to the guys that ran the company, look, guys, what's happening? We're getting to the point where in 2009, it was still a case of if you issued a check and it bounced, there was serious repercussions. And I've got these guys that are working for me say, look, there's rent checks coming soon. If we if we don't sort this out, there's going to be prison time for some people. And the next day I got made redundant by the company. And so it was a blessing in a way, because I'd already thinking that I wanted to get out of where I was. I managed to get what I was owed out of it. The sad part is a lot of my team didn't, and I'm still in touch with some of them 6 to 8 months later, and they were still being drip fed the amounts they were owed. So that was very sad from that side of things. But for me as an individual, it was a wake up call that I now was jobless in a market where there were so many more people also coming into that market space with far more experience and far more ideas or qualifications, if you like, in terms of being employed. And so I sort of sat there and thought, well, actually, what am I going to do? And I didn't have any grand plan of jumping into entrepreneurship or anything. I ended up going to an event on a weekend in Knowledge Village, and it was an event that was all about how to make money whilst you sleep using the internet. And I went along to it, and I thought, okay, when I listened, I actually went with my dad, and we both sat down, and it was quite interesting because the generational divide. I sat down, opened my laptop to make notes. He sat down and opened his pen and paper to take his notes. And I said, why are you going to do that? Aren't you just going to type them up later? And he just looked at me and said, don't worry about it. And so we went through this and listened, and it was very interesting. But again, it seemed like that just doesn't seem real. It seems like a bit of a scam, to be honest. And so I said to the guy at the end, I said, okay, it sounds brilliant. Of course, it sounds great, but I don't necessarily believe it. Can you show me? And so he became my first mentor in the digital space. He showed me how to build online systems that generated revenue. And within the first month, I'd made my first dollars in the online space, and I became an affiliate marketer. And so affiliate marketing is effectively knowing how to find a product and a market in the online space, build a system in the middle, i.e. a website, put the two together and take a commission. And so at that time, it was possible to do. Google was a different machine than it is today. And I ended up building around 55 online businesses in all sorts of different niches. And I thought it was great because you build it, set it up and leave it. And then it just generates advertising revenue and things like AdSense and all of this stuff. And I think this is fantastic. I wish I'd known about this before. And so this now we're probably getting towards 2011, 2012. And then Google changed the rules. And they changed the rules overnight. And pretty much half of my businesses were just taken down. Google decided, you know what? These kind of affiliate businesses, and they were right to do this, these kind of affiliate businesses don't really add any value to the user. You know, why isn't that user going directly to that person who's selling the product? Why are they coming through your website or bridge page? We don't like that. And so they really shifted things from the affiliate model. And it scared me a little bit because obviously during this time, people are saying to me, what are you doing, Barry? Because you're not employed. How are you making money? What's going on? And I said, well, I'm an affiliate marketer. And back then in 2009, people in the UAE especially were saying, what is that exactly? I don't understand. And so then as Google changed the rules, I lost half of my businesses. A few of my network was saying, okay, well, I don't really understand what you're doing, but you've explained what the outcome is. Can you do that for my business? And so this is then how I got dragged into the consultancy side of digital marketing. And a lot of my networks saying, well, can you just come in and can you evaluate this proposal for me? Because we've got some people in senior marketing positions at that time who had no exposure to digital. And so they were reading proposals that were talking about PPC and SEO and CTRs. And they're literally saying to me, what does this mean? Because I don't know what it means. And I don't know whether that price that they're quoting me is good, bad, or indifferent, because I don't really understand what this proposal is saying to me. So I started to help some of them with that. And then it became very obvious there was a hole in the market, because they would say to me, okay, well, now you've sort of said, don't bother with these guys, talk to these two providers. They can do something for us. And then they turn to me and say, well, can you do it? And I said, initially I said no. And then after sort of the fifth or sixth person saying, I was like, okay, maybe I should be doing this then. And that's how my digital agency, very small, evolved to actually create the digital strategy for a business and then execute on those things like search engine optimization. Back then, it was also some website design to help them actually build a website that could convert rather than just a brochure. Then do the search engine optimization, paid advertising through Google. Social media was still in its infancy a little bit then in the UAE. So it was about helping them to establish those channels and think about the content strategy. And that was what I sort of got taken along for the ride for a little bit. And it was very, very interesting. And then in around 2014, actually, my business partner in the UK, my now business partner in the UK, we met in true digital style. We met on Twitter. He was visiting Dubai. He sent a tweet saying, anybody in the digital realm fancy a coffee? And he said where he was staying. I said, my office is opposite that hotel. I'll see you in the lobby for a coffee. We sat down, had a chat about everything. He also had a digital agency in Ireland. And then he was saying to me, but I'm actually moving away from this a little bit into this area of of cybersecurity and online reputation and cyberbullying, actually, because he is the father of 2 young boys, and this also was starting to happen to me in the UAE, that when you were talking to people in businesses who were marketing directors and general managers, when you take away their title, you're left with mum and dad. And then we started talking about how to leverage YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all of these channels for their business. But as we started to explain how it worked, they say, well, hang on a minute, if that's how YouTube works, does that mean that my 10-year-old can also see all of these things? I said, yeah, that is. And Wayne, my business partner, said, have you got a problem here in the UAE with things like cyberbullying? And I said, I don't really know. And a little bit of research later, it became very obvious that wherever we have access to the internet and social media, there's a problem. And so that led to the next business, or the next, not business, it's a not-for-profit initiative that kind of started as my CSR give back, which is taking all the digital knowledge I had and turning it into bite-sized chunks for teachers, students and parents, and this is what Beat the Cyberbully is, to help increase the level of understanding of what's happening in the online space, how it was happening, and then some of the issues that young people need to be aware of, that mum and dad 100% need to be aware of, so they can help guide their children in this digital world, and try and just reduce that gap between what children and young people know about the internet and all of the tools, because they get it in terms of how to use it and away they go, and what mum and dad know about it, where sometimes they don't even know some of these platforms exist, and their children are on them and they are getting themselves into trouble, and mum and dad are a little bit left in the dark. And so we're trying to reduce that gap since 2014. And unfortunately, I can sit here and say we failed, because in 2021, that gap is getting bigger. Mum and dad are going back further. Our children and young people are going further and further forwards at an alarming rate, and we're trying to catch up. And so this is why I think that we at the moment with Beat the Cyberbully have got a big challenge on our hands that we're rising to, and that's to try and help educate and increase awareness around this, to just reel in that gap a little bit again. And so that's where we're at now with Beat the Cyberbully. We are leveraging technology as well to try and do that. So we launched a technology platform called Cobabble, and we originally built that to help deliver a lot of our content around cyberbullying prevention and cybersafety to parents and students and teachers. And in the process of building that platform, we were made aware by a lot of our network that, oh, this technology platform that you've built, can we use it in our business? Because we want to be able to use it to deliver training, to deliver content internally. We then started talking to a few other businesses, and now it's actually designed to help deliver and digitize things like checklists and audits and forms. So you have this all in a simple to use app on a smartphone, which most companies' employees now already have. So there's no investment in technology there. And it's an application, web-based application, that allows for easy access and for this dissemination of information. So that's kind of my brief, well, I've probably gone on for a bit in terms of my transition into what we're doing right now in terms of the different businesses and the different platforms, and where I started a long time ago now. It's scary looking back, because it's been a good 20 odd years now that's happened.
Yeah. No, I think it's very interesting. And, if I were I wrote a couple of things down as you were speaking. And at first, I find it very interesting that all of us, when we come to Dubai, we come for either by accident or on vacation, or we say, maybe why not do like a year or 2 years in Dubai and then move on, right? But Dubai has that beauty about it. And we were just talking about it the other day in terms of doing business in Dubai and the opportunities that are available. But also something you mentioned, like even the way you met your business partner. And I feel that in larger markets, like in the West and in the US particular, for example, it's so much more difficult to connect with people, even via social media. It's like Dubai has this thing where you can message somebody on Twitter and they will actually be open to meet with you, and no matter where they're coming from. But it's like, it's very interesting. I think Dubai has that magic to it, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I love that.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's also that a lot of us find ourselves there like you said, that we're actually transient, whether it's we end up there for 6 months or we end up there being for 16 years. There's a point where we're going to move on, because we can't, that's changing now with the visas and so forth. But back then you couldn't stay here indefinitely. And what I found was that a lot of people were far more open, like you say, to connecting with people and just having that initial chat and say, oh, interesting. Nothing that we can do right now, but nice guy, nice girl. Add them to your Rolodex those days, or put them in your smartphone, and add them on LinkedIn, because you never knew. And this is where I found also in the UAE back then, networking was a job. Really, it's one of those things where, and everybody was open to networking and talking to people and looking to try and help each other, rather than sell each other on the first interaction. They're genuinely actually listening and going, oh, okay, well, I can't use you, but I just spoke to somebody over there, or I've got connections on LinkedIn. Let me hook you up together. The conversation goes on, and business is happening. And I think you're right. I haven't got much exposure to other markets, but it does seem like a little bit of magic there in Dubai in particular, where that was almost viewed as normal. But then when I talk to people outside of the region, it's like, whoa, that's cool. But no, that doesn't happen where I am in the UK.
Yeah. No, business cultures are very different. And having spent 8 years in Dubai and then kind of now exploring the US market with some of the things that we're doing, I can definitely tell you it's just very different. And hence why of course it's a larger market, it's more exciting and all of that. But it's just, you almost have to teach yourself a new way of, Dubai, we're so welcoming there. We're like, yes, let's connect. And it just makes sense. And we just, but also it's the vibe and the entrepreneurship vibe that is in Dubai, and it's a very small city, relatively speaking. So it's like everything is compacted there. So, and I think it's a beautiful place to start a business. And I think that there's a lot of support and just the environment there is very supportive. And that is something that I wish other places would learn from Dubai, is that creating an environment where everybody's just contributing and sharing, and it's a friendly competition, so to say. So I love that about Dubai. But listen, I want to talk to you a little bit about cyber stuff, and then I want to learn more about you as an entrepreneur, as yourself, because I think it's a very interesting story. But I don't know anything about cyber stuff, like nothing about cyber. I mean, of course, basic things. I understand the challenges that may be out there, but from your perspective, having been in this for a few years now and having been exposed to, I'm sure, a lot of different information that is probably scary, what has been the most shocking for you, of like, what do normal people not know about cybersecurity or cyberbullying?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question. And I think that the answer to that is quite a somber one. And I think that the reality is a lot of people, parents especially, don't realize how many young people are actually taking their own lives because of stuff that's happening in the digital space. And it's not a nice topic to talk about, but it's one that I think really needs to be talked about, because suicide is becoming such a big problem for pre-teens and teenagers, which again, when you think about it, is just insane that young people who are at that point of their lives, that they haven't even really started, and they've gone through something that has got them to the point where they believe the only option for them is to not be here anymore. And that's really the most shocking thing that I found out myself, and I also share with the people that I talk with, parents and the young people as well, depending on their age in the schools that I talk to, because it's not a subject that's talked about. In the UAE, it's not a subject that's even legal to talk about in some cases, although that's evolved over the last few years as well, which is part of the great thing about the UAE and Dubai, because it is evolving. It's still a very young city, and the UAE is still a young country, but it's evolving so quickly. And even just being able to talk about some of these things now, which again, 6-7 years ago, it was not to be talked about. And when I would position myself to speak to schools, I'd say, here's the list of things that you can't talk about to the students or the parents, because it's just, we can't touch those subjects. And 7 years later, they're saying, no, please talk about them, because they need to know about them. They're finding out about them anyway online, which is a big part of the problem. Sometimes I think mum and dad are blissfully unaware of how much their children are being exposed to in the online space when they hand them a device that has no controls on them, no parental controls, no guidelines, no guidelines from mum and dad as to this is how we are going to use this technology in our house. It's just, especially in the UAE, we've seen that there's a lot of people go there to have a better standard of life. And that standard of life means earning a bit more, living in a nicer house, having home help, having the nice things in life. And what we've seen over the years is that what looks like is happening is that one of the fallout of that is that parenting is also being outsourced a little bit. And so mum and dad are not as involved with a young person's life as they perhaps would be in their home country, because there's somebody to help. There's a nanny, there's a maid, there might be a driver. The schools talk to us sometimes, say, we don't see the parents. They get dropped off by the nanny, they get picked up by the driver. We don't see the parents because, again, in this world that we live in, they're both working parents. They both have to work in order just to survive, because it's an expensive world to live in. Yeah. But then what happens is that when that young person says, oh, it's Eid, or it's Christmas, or it's Ramadan, or something's coming up, and mum says, okay, well, we want to get you a present. These days, 9 times out of 10, that present is going to be an iPad, the latest iPhone, the latest Samsung smartphone. And because there's been a little bit of distance between mum and dad and the child, it's like, okay, well, we know we need to make up for this, or we feel that we need to make up for this. We want to make our child happy. They've asked for, iPhone 13 Pro, whatever it is now. And we give it to them, and we give it to them wrapped up in the box. So it's completely vanilla, which means that there's no protection whatsoever on that device. And we say, off you go. And they do. And of course, they're curious and they go on there, and all the kids are talking about this app, or they're doing this, or they're doing that, and they get into it. And even we as adults in this, we know what's happening sometimes, and we get dragged into rabbit holes, and that 5 minutes turns into 20 minutes, turns into an hour. And you think, hang on a minute, what was I doing? And I haven't done it. I've just been watching YouTube videos on something that piqued my interest. And it might have been about building my business or marketing or self-maintenance, whatever it is. But we got distracted. And then you try and apply that same to a preteen or teen brain. And it's not surprising that they get into the situations that they get into, and exposed to some of the, just to round it off, exposed to some of the topics at an age that we perhaps wouldn't want them to be exposed to it. They're getting exposed to certain things younger. And there's a number of subjects where I still maintain some of those subjects would be best coming from mum and dad, framed in the way that we are trying to raise our children, rather than them learning from TikTok or YouTube or their peers. And that's where we're trying to really, really make a difference when it comes to the issues, and then awareness of those issues, but then also trying to help children, especially young people, understand the opportunity that they have with the internet and social media to do anything, to create the life that they want to lead, and connect with people on the other side of the world, and ask them questions about whatever it is they're passionate about, whether that's football or physics or astronomy, and to gather all of this information and then say, you know what, oh, that's really interesting. I've got an idea on how to do that, or why don't we do it a different way? And then they've got a channel to push that idea out there, and somebody on the other side of the planet going, that's really good. And they're only 13 years old, and suddenly things start to happen, and that opportunity is available to them, but they're getting sucked into some of the more, the murkier side of the internet, and some of the issues that are very attractive to a young person, because it seems like, oh, that's what everybody's doing, or there's this, there's that, and is trying to help them to differentiate between what's going to effectively waste their time online versus investing their time online, and trying to, the way that I position this to a lot of them is to, especially to parents, actually, is about, when we were growing up, it was about street smarts and being able to see something unfolding in your school, on the playground, on the street, or the block that you lived on. You could see when trouble was going to happen, and you got yourself out of that situation. You see that something's going to go wrong, and I just don't want to be there. So you know what? I'm going to cross the street and I'm going to go that way. And I avoid that situation. And it's trying to help them see some of these things happening in the digital world, on the TikToks and the YouTubes, and on the gaming platforms as well, where if you're not really paying attention, then it doesn't seem like there's anything wrong. Somebody sent you a message, or there's a link to buy this, or all of these things which are seemingly innocent, but actually there's nefarious reason behind it, because unfortunately there's a multi-billion-dollar business in the online space of grooming and extorting not just children and young people but adults as well. You know, the famous, everybody's got a very rich relative in Nigeria who left them hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And that email keeps being sent out all the time. Why? Because people still fall for it, and this is where we need to increase our level of understanding about what's happening to help protect ourselves. And then for those that are parents or aunties or uncles or just anyone that has a young person in their life that they care about, they need to increase their own knowledge to then help protect those that they care about.
Yeah, and it's you mentioned something very important, which is just the education pieces, educating and raising awareness. I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because we have this assumption that parents, you know, should know, or, you know, it's like we face similar challenges with some of the work that we do with Western when we talk about the different dimensions of well-being, when we talk about the future careers, and parents don't always know, like, you know, unless you're in that space, which is why we need experts like yourself to say, hey, like, this is happening, this is the reality. Because the parents, they are very busy in their particular areas and their industries and working and et cetera, and especially in places like UAE, but everywhere, you know. So it's like, you know, and I love that there's, you know, again, that you're raising awareness about these things, because it is heartbreaking that so much of our youth today, and I'm so grateful I didn't grow up in an era where cell phones were like a thing. I mean, it was like later, when I was like later on in high school, I think that cell phones became like a thing, and it was like that manual text message. It was awful. But anyway, I'm so glad I didn't grow up, because I just feel like, you know, like that having that street smarts builds so much resilience, so much confidence, which is today, kids today are, it's very much destroyed by the perceptions of social media, which is where that, you know, the bullying, the hidden messages essentially. And what's scary is that you were talking about the, you know, when you go into the rabbit hole of watching YouTube videos. I was actually listening to something the other day, and they were saying that predators and messengers of specific kind of, you know, ideas and methodologies and stuff like that, the way it's spread is, for example, you'll be watching a cartoon, your regular cartoon, and then whoever they are, these hackers, I don't know who they are, they will actually, predators, whatever you want to call them, they will actually put a cartoon that is the same thing, but with different messaging. So they're almost, you know, it's scary. It's scary because as a kid, as an adult, you won't distinguish sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I mean, how many people still fall for scams and get brainwashed and go into, you know, and fall for the algorithm? But as a kid, do you know what I mean? And it's scary to think that so many children committing suicide, making a decision without even having experienced life that impacted them so much, that say, this is not worth the life I want to live.
Yeah, exactly that. It's really scary. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do, is to help young people. And the reason they get to that point is because they feel there's nobody to talk to. They're going through this journey, and they are either being abused in the online space, they're being cyberbullied online, or something's happening to them. And they don't feel like they can talk to anyone. They don't feel like mum and dad understand. They feel ashamed that they're going through this. They don't want to talk to a counselor. They definitely don't want to talk to their peers. And this is a big part of our messaging, is to say that we have to help them understand that they can and should talk to somebody, anybody, and that keeping it inside is perhaps the worst thing that can possibly happen, because then they internalize this. And then if it's cyberbullying, they start to, you know, maybe it is true. Maybe I don't have any friends. Maybe I am worthless. And they start to believe all this messaging that's coming at them from a million different places and from people that they don't know. And you're thinking, again, how a young person is not physiologically developed enough at 12, 13, 14, even at 17 years old to deal with some of this stuff. And it's about trying to help us as a community and as a society realize that this is a real problem, and that we all, you know, if a young person decides that me as Barry is the person they can talk to, then I want to be equipped to be able to say, okay, I'm so glad that you decided to tell me that this is what you're going through. Let's figure this out. Let's, you know, and work with it, because I'm not a psychologist, and I know there's certain things you shouldn't say, but it's also just that I want to make sure that any young person that trusts me with this message, I'm able to say something that says, okay, I'm really glad that you've decided to tell me. What do you want to do next? Do we need to keep this between you and I? And can I bring you to your family, or is that not possible? Can we talk to a professional, a counselor from that side of things? How do we do something about this? But that first step of them actually telling somebody, so important, and helping them all understand that there's no shame in doing that at all, that they are going through something, and that by able to talk to somebody about it, it can really lessen that burden for them to get them to the point where they don't make that ultimate tragic decision. And that's really the driver behind this as well. And the statistics at the moment are showing that I think suicide is actually the number 2 killer of 15 to 24-year-olds, and it's number 2 on the list, only behind accidental death, which is it's so scary, and it's so sad, and it's also that, again, I'm a big advocate of the technology, but I'm also very aware that there's a direct correlation between what's happening to our young people and the introduction of the smartphone, and the lines are almost running in parallel. And so that's where I go into all of my sessions talking to parents and students as an advocate for technology, for positive use of the technology, because I think there's so many opportunities available. But in order for us to take those opportunities, and for our children and young people to take those opportunities, we need to understand the pitfalls as well. And that's why we end up talking about some of these things, which are wholly unpleasant. But I really believe they need to be talked about and have a light shone on them, because the more that happens, the less taboo these subjects are, the more likely that our children and young people are going to say, you know what, I'm going to tell somebody about this. I need to tell somebody, and I'm going to. And whether that's mum or dad, and ideally, I hope that is, or that they're going to take responsibility. And a lot of millennials and Generation Z, again, some of the research is showing that they are happier to do that, which is, it's a positive thing that they're willing to talk to somebody because they realize that there's something wrong. It's also really sad because they realize something's wrong, and it's usually related these days to something that's happening in the digital space, not necessarily cyberbullying, but living up to, as you mentioned, those goals and those people that are online that are my best life, my Insta life, and young people saying, why is my life not like that? I want that. And that seems like an awesome thing. And then they get themselves into a state because it's not like that. And then they say, that's not fair. And then they literally, they get anxious, they get depressed because they're looking at influencers and famous people online saying, I want that. And I'm doing all this stuff. And this is where they get dragged in, because then they think, well, the more outrageous I am, the more that I show, the more that I'm out there, then there's a higher probability of me getting to that Insta life or that TikTok life. And it's a cycle, it's a spiral that we need to try and help young people really understand how to get out of it, and help mum and dad and aunties and uncles and caregivers I'd be able to identify that, you know what, this is something that we should be talking to them about. Or I've seen some of these red flags now, and I can see there's something going on. I need to find a way to help this young person talk to somebody, whether if it's not me, just talk to somebody about it, because there's obviously something going wrong. And that's what we're working towards.
Yeah. Listen, Insta life is not real life, people. Insta life is not real life.
It's not.
Stop believing it. Yeah, no, it's just, it's scary. And again, I'm just so glad that awareness is being brought to attention, and particularly in the Middle East, because I know this is a global problem, but in the Middle East, statistically, first of all, there's a very young population in the Middle East in general. And I think in Saudi, I forget, but it's like the highest number of Snapchat users, TikTok, and like Instagram are in Saudi Arabia in terms of like the youth, like percentage wise, like, because there's such a huge young population, and majority of them are some of the heaviest users of social media on continuous basis. So it's and it's like you said, it's a fresh topic for countries like the UAE and even Saudi Arabia as well. So I think it's a great space to be in and to raise awareness in this.
Yeah, there's definitely like I say, Saudi, and this is a statistic from a little while ago, but I remember that they were the highest consumer of YouTube on a
Yeah.
daily basis, and it was somewhere around 90 million hours
Yeah. It's something
cumulatively. And I
crazy.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
They spend a lot of time online, these Saudis. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so I think it's definitely again, I mean, it's a global problem, but I think that I mean, again, you're being based in the Middle East. I think it's a great place to be and start to bring awareness to these things. So yeah, kudos to you guys for doing that. Listen, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk to you about you as an entrepreneur. So I'm always curious, you know, what I've noticed, because I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs on this podcast, and what I've noticed is that there's specific kind of set of characteristics and habits and routines that entrepreneurs have compared to somebody who spends their life in a corporate setting, for example. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's just clear differences. And I'm just curious for yourself, like what helped you, or what are some of the things that you do to have this entrepreneurial part to you, because it requires a certain level of curiosity and resilience, continuous learning, essentially. So is there something that you do on daily basis, on weekly basis, that helps you maintain that? What has helped you in the past?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's like I say, my journey into entrepreneurship happened a little bit by accident and a little bit because I was forced into it because of the global situation. But what helped me transition to it was a number of people that I had read from different books and also talked to from a mentor perspective about this shift of mindset, the entrepreneur mindset versus the employee mindset, and the ability to move yourself out of that, which takes some doing because there is a lot of security with being an employee to a certain extent in terms of collecting your paycheck at the end of the month and all of this kind of stuff. But then when you do shift across and you start to think, you know what, I'm going to do something my way, I'm going to build something the way that I would like it to operate. It's very difficult to go back. And that was the one thing that I realized, that if I had to, I would get a job. But I think I would be very, very difficult employee for anyone that I was working for, because I've done this way now. So that shift was very, very important into doing that, because once you've done that, you start to realize that, oh, okay, well, I've made the decision to do something on my own. One of my decisions was I am not looking to build a bricks and mortar business. I was always looking at keeping it very lean. I didn't want to have overheads in terms of offices and physical space, because I knew that was one of the biggest killer for a lot of businesses, especially if you're not getting seed funding or you're not getting investment, which is not something that I wanted to do. And so it was trying to keep it as lean as possible. And in doing that, and I don't necessarily recommend this to people, is that you end up doing a lot of stuff yourself. You know, you take one hat off and put another one on, which we all do actually when we start our business. And actually, the sooner that we can start taking some of those hats off and not putting them back on and having other people do that for us, whether that's actual employees or outsourced from that side of things, that's a huge positive step. And that's actually one of the lessons I learned. Was the first time I hired my first virtual assistant, changed my business completely, because I could then get them to do some of the stuff that I was doing that I shouldn't have been doing. And I couldn't afford to do it when I did it. And this is also something from, I know someone you know Tim Ferriss, something from his learnings. He said, do it, because if you do that, then you can free up the time to make the money that will pay for them.
Yes.
And because if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, your hourly rate should be more than what, or equivalent to this person that you're employing. And if you're doing what you're doing and you're supposed to be doing, you're generating the revenue to be able to pay for this person and then for more people as well. And so this was something. So to come back to the question in terms of what do I do, routine is very important in terms of what we do on a daily basis. I also finding continuous learning is important, and I do that now through a lot of podcasts, just in terms of trying to listen, and that I do with also the other thing that's important with my daily routine, which has been lacking recently since having 2 young children, but is the exercise side of things. And if doing nothing else, is at least that 40-45 minute walk. Put my earphones in, listen to somebody talking about something, and sometimes it's learning, sometimes it's business, sometimes it's listening to a really funny podcast at the moment called Smartless, which is Jason Bateman and I've forgotten the names. It's got Sean Hayes and another comedian whose name has gone completely, but just that time to myself, doing some exercise and then listening and learning at the same time. That's something that I've been trying to make as an integral part of my my day and weeks as possible. But like I say, I am completely fallible, and it hasn't gone according to plan since every day. As much as possible, you work towards it, but there's days where we've got a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and sometimes their needs take precedence, and that's just the way it is. But I think having those routines and having that in place are really, really important because there's other elements and there's other people that have, they plan everything out. They have these schedules that they stick to religiously. And I look up to those people because it's something that I aspire to, and I try to, as much as possible, get there. But there's those things that are non-negotiable for me, and those ones of the ones that I've mentioned there, as much as possible, because I notice if you don't get to do the exercise, you don't do it, then it impacts your ability to be as effective in your business, and it's something that's just been rising to the top of my list, and it's something that we're really focusing on this year.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I mean, we were talking about it the other day, and I said for me as well, like if I don't get that exercise in, if I don't have a routine, it's very difficult to maintain, to just maintain the day-to-day of entrepreneurship and your emotions, which business is personal in this case, it always is. It's your thing, so it's
a roller coaster.
A roller coaster, yeah, without this routine. And I've noticed that most people, that's kind of what they have. And I think it's just about like creating a system that works for you, and life happens at the end of the day. And having a 4 and 2-year-old in your case definitely is gonna come priorities are gonna change. So it's interesting, because I always see entrepreneurs, they tend to do things slightly different, and because it requires a different kind of motivation to be self-driven as well, because if you're not driving your business, you don't have income. So it's a different, there's no days off essentially, but you have to give yourself that time. Otherwise you just, you're not as effective as you can be. So no.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it comes down to this. A lot of people starting their business to work less, earn more, manage it from the beach and so forth, and which is the dream. It's like, it doesn't work like that to begin with, but you still get the opportunity to say, you know what, today I'm going to go to the beach and I'm going to spend 3 hours on the beach. And you make that conscious decision, knowing that at 9 o'clock that evening, you're then going to sit down and probably do 3 to 4 hours of work to catch up with that. But that's your choice.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference, is that because again, in the corporate world, you can very easily go to an office, clock in at 8 o'clock, clock out at 6 o'clock, and have done nothing. And you're still picking up your paycheck. You haven't actually done anything. A lot of people get very reticent. It's like, well, I'm just a cog in the machine. What difference does it make anyway? I'm just sort of doing this, and I just run through the routine of doing it. But I don't feel like I'm making that difference. And it's just strange. This is all part of that mindset shift to say, okay, well, actually, I do want to be in control of that, and I want to be able to make that decision. And I know that means I'm going to have a late night, but I don't mind, because it's on me and it's my business, and I'm going to make sure that I'm doing it the way that I want to do it. And I have that now. I have that luxury or that choice to do it that way, because I've made a decision to go and build something. And again, whether that's as a solopreneur, whether I don't class myself really as an entrepreneur, because I think that the definition of an entrepreneur is building something that you can then extricate yourself from and go on to the next thing. And I'm still very much involved in the projects that I'm working, but it's something that I'm now working towards in terms of systemizing more of what Beat the Cyberbully is, especially with the advent of the last 2 years, to leverage the technology that I talk about, to put recorded sessions in place, to have a funnel that allows those for access to schools and for children and for parents. The virtual sessions are then the next level of that funnel, and then the in-person delivery is the top of that funnel. So it is trying to extricate myself out of that time for money model, which is always very easy to get into as an entrepreneur, but it's not the best or most effective way of building your business, because then if you don't do the work, nothing comes in. And that's when you just say, you know what, I should have a system in place that means when I do the work, I can leverage that work over and over again, or I have a team, and that's the other way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do you hang out these days on social media? If there's any place, where can people get in touch with you or learn more about cyberbullying?
Yeah, so Beat the Cyberbully is active on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and LinkedIn. And we do a lot of sort of pushing through LinkedIn, actually, interestingly enough, because we're also looking at helping. We've been asked to come in and speak to corporates because, of course, businesses are made up of people, and people are parents and aunties and uncles and so forth. And so it's interesting to see that I've done a lot of sessions in schools, and then parents that have been on those school sessions have then contacted me to come and speak to their company. And so LinkedIn is where we're spending a lot of time. And with the advent of Cobabble, which is the technology platform, LinkedIn is going to be the primary channel for that as well, because it's talking to those businesses that are looking to digitize and digitalize their processes and their business. So those businesses that are perhaps a little bit older or have got some archaic processes in place because that's just the way they've always done it, but need to join us and the technology revolution and the 2022 moving forward. So LinkedIn is the main place. Beat the Cyberbully is across social on @Cybersafety UAE, and then Cobabble is searchable as Cobabble. So that's where the way are. And the channel I spend most of my time is LinkedIn as well, and easily find me on there as Barry Lee Cummings, and always happy to connect with people on there, just as we spoke about, in terms of I might not be able to help in terms of utilize the services, but within my network, you make an introduction and two people get benefit, and I'm always happy to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. I definitely learned a lot about cyberbullying, these things, because it's just something that I think we don't think about enough. And it's again, it's awareness and education. So again, kudos to you for doing the work and spreading the word. And we'll definitely start and do our best on the Western side and promoting this conversation to make sure the right people hear it and more people get exposure to it. I think it's an important topic, and I'm all here for it. So thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks very much, Elaine.